If you had asked me, then I would have said with absolute certainty that Rachel Monroe was the most honest, grounded, loving person I had ever met, because when we first found each other it felt less like a beginning and more like coming home after wandering in the dark for years. And when she smiled at me with those ocean gray eyes and that quiet confidence that made everyone in the room seem smaller, I honestly believed I had stumbled into something most people spend their entire lives searching for but never actually find. We met on a delayed flight from Dallas to Austin when our gate changed 3 times and our conversation started with a shared eye roll over the chaos and turned into a 3-hour exchange that made the entire terminal disappear. And when she laughed at one of my dumb jokes, I remember thinking not just that I wanted to know her more, but that I already somehow did. And when we finally boarded and ended up seated together, it felt like fate was making sure I didn't blow my chance. From that day on, everything with Rachel moved fast but never felt rushed, and within weeks we were spending every weekend together exploring the hill country, trying out overpriced wine bars, and talking about everything from childhood regrets to career dreams like we'd known each other forever and had just been waiting to reconnect. She told me she was a freelance marketing consultant who had recently started working remotely full-time, and it made sense when she disappeared for long blocks during the day or traveled suddenly for client meetings, and I respected her hustle because I knew what it meant to build something on your own terms, and she never gave me a reason to doubt a word she said. My friends liked her immediately, and my parents, who normally distrusted everyone I dated, actually invited her to Sunday dinner after just one meeting and said she was the kind of woman who didn't just walk into your life but upgraded it. And I remember smiling like an idiot because I believed them, believed in her, believed that somehow after years of almosts and disappointments and women who only stayed long enough to leave their damage behind, I had finally found the real thing. But the thing about trust is that it blinds you just enough to miss the signs you would otherwise never ignore. And if I had been looking closer, I might have noticed that Rachel never invited me to her place, always insisting hers was too small or too messy, or that she just preferred being at mine because it was more us. And at the time, I took it as a compliment, a sign that she already saw our lives blending into something shared and lasting, not as a warning that she was keeping part of herself hidden just out of reach. There were moments I should have questioned more deeply, like the first time she canceled a weekend trip to San Antonio we had been planning for over a month, claiming a last-minute client emergency that couldn't be rescheduled. And even though she sounded genuinely upset on the phone and apologized a dozen times, promising to make it up to me, something in her voice felt distant, like she wasn't just distracted by work but somewhere else entirely. And I told myself I was overthinking it, because when she showed up the next day with takeout from my favorite Thai place and that tired smile that said she hadn't slept much, I let the explanation sit without pushing for more. Over time, these little changes started piling up, like how she always silenced her phone when she was with me, or how she would sometimes disappear into the other room to take a call and then return with a carefully composed expression and a new reason why she had to leave early or couldn't stay the night. And I kept telling myself it was because she was busy, successful, and dedicated to her career, not because she was hiding something. Because when someone looks at you with that kind of warmth and tells you you're everything they've ever wanted, it's easier to believe the lie than to admit the truth might be breaking in around the edges. One Saturday morning, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the nightstand, and I wasn't trying to snoop, but the screen flashed twice with the name Ben followed by a heart emoji. And even though I wasn't the jealous type, something about that moment chilled me in a way I couldn't explain, because I had never heard her mention anyone named Ben. And in our months together, she had been careful about sharing stories of her past, always steering the conversation toward her career or childhood, but rarely touching the present outside of what we were building. I wanted to believe it was nothing, a brother, maybe a cousin, or an old friend from college who used emojis a little too freely, but that small seed of doubt was planted, and once something takes root in your gut, it's impossible to shake, no matter how much love you try to pile on top of it. And I found myself watching her more closely, not out of suspicion, but out of quiet fear that everything I thought was real might not be. A few days later, I casually asked if she had any siblings, and she smiled quickly and said she was an only child before changing the subject. And for the first time since we met, I felt something I couldn't ignore, a tiny fracture running through her story like a spider web in glass. And as much as I wanted to pretend it didn't matter, something deep inside me knew we had just stepped off the map and into unfamiliar territory. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon while I was working from home, and Rachel had said she'd be in meetings all day across town, which made it surprising when I spotted her walking out of a small grocery store just a few blocks from my apartment with a canvas bag over her shoulder and sunglasses pushed up into her hair, talking on the phone with that slightly animated look she got when she was trying to sound casual but still keep her voice low enough not to be overheard. And I almost waved at her, almost crossed the street to say hi, but something stopped me, not suspicion exactly, but a strange cold weight in my chest that told me to stay still and watch instead of announce myself. She didn't see me, and I watched as she walked not in the direction of her supposed client's office, but down a quiet residential street I had never known her to mention. And I followed her at a distance, telling myself I wasn't spying, just curious, confused, unsettled, because why would she lie about where she was going on a random afternoon? And why did the way she walked seem so familiar, like she'd done it 100 times before without thinking? She reached a small small tin house with blue shutters and a wind chime hanging from the porch, and when she knocked, the door opened almost instantly, and a boy maybe 6 or 7 years old launched himself into her arms with a shout of "Mommy" that I heard clear as day, even from where I stood frozen across the street, heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick, and I watched her pick him up like it was the most natural thing in the world, pressing her face into his hair as if she'd done it every day for years, and I felt the ground shift under me in slow, horrible motion. I didn't confront her, not then. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as she stepped inside, and the door closed behind her like a final scene in a movie. I hadn't realized I'd been watching from the wrong side of the screen, and I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself that there had to be some other explanation, that maybe it was her nephew or a friend's kid or a situation more complicated than it looked. But deep down I knew better, because you don't carry someone like that unless they're yours, and you don't lie that well unless you've done it before. I walked home in silence, mind spinning, hands numb, and when my phone lit up an hour later with her usual goodnight text, I stared at the screen for a long time before finally typing back a simple "Hope the meetings went well" and hitting send with fingers that shook, because now I wasn't just holding doubt, I was holding a truth I wasn't ready to touch. That night I didn't sleep the way a person doesn't sleep when the world they trusted has been turned upside down and all the rules they thought they understood no longer apply, and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, playing the image over and over in my mind, the way she held that boy, how natural it looked, how effortlessly he had called her mommy, and no matter how many excuses I tried to invent, none of them held up under the weight of what I had seen, because a child doesn't lie like that, and neither does a woman who's been living two lives so seamlessly that one side never even sensed the other. I didn't confront her the next day or the one after that, because part of me still wasn't ready to hear the truth spoken out loud, as if silence might somehow preserve the last few pieces of the illusion I'd been living in. And I went through the motions like a man, pretending to be himself, laughing at texts, replying to emails, eating meals I couldn't taste, all while waiting for the moment I would finally have the courage to ask the question I already knew the answer to. That weekend she came over just like always, breezing into my apartment with her usual warmth and carrying a bottle of wine, like we were still just two people in love, not two actors performing different versions of reality. And as she curled up next to me on the couch, I studied her every move, trying to figure out how many nights she had held me, knowing what she was hiding, how many kisses she had given me while carrying the weight of another life in the back of her mind. And when she looked at me with those soft eyes and asked if I was okay, I smiled and lied, because I wasn't ready to find out if she would lie back. Over the next few days I started piecing together the cracks I'd once ignored, like how she never stayed over on weeknights claiming early meetings, or how she always made sure we spent weekends at my place, never hers, and how she never answered her phone if it rang past 10 p.m., saying she liked to unplug before bed. And I realized how much I had wanted to believe the version of her she had offered me, not because I was naive, but because she had been so good at making the lie feel like truth. I started digging, not in the obsessive way of someone trying to trap her, but in the quiet, desperate way of someone who needs closure before the pain swallows them whole. And what I found broke more than just the illusion. It broke the part of me that still wanted to protect her from the consequences of her own betrayal. It took everything I had to keep my voice steady when I finally asked her over dinner one quiet evening if she had ever kept something big from someone she loved, and I watched as her fork paused halfway to her mouth before she set it down gently and gave me a look that might have meant 1,000 things or nothing at all, depending on what she thought I already knew. And she smiled a little too slowly and said, "Everyone has their secrets, but love is about learning to live with someone's shadows, not just their sunlight." And I nodded like her answer made sense, even though it felt like a knife twisting in my gut, because now I wasn't chasing suspicion, I was dragging a confession out into the light, one careful question at a time. A few days later I couldn't take it anymore and followed her again, this time with a sick certainty already pulsing through my blood, and I watched as she pulled into the same quiet street and parked in front of the same tin house, and was greeted not just by the little boy but by a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with the easy movements of someone who wasn't surprised to see her there, and who kissed her on the cheek like it was routine, like it was real, like it belonged to them. I stood far enough away to be invisible, but close enough to see the truth clearly, and I watched as they walked inside together like a family, and everything I thought I knew about my life snapped like drywood under too much pressure. And I didn't move for a long time, didn't cry, didn't speak, just stood there letting the betrayal soak into my skin until it felt like a second layer I would never be able to scrub off. That night when she texted me saying she missed me, saying she wished we could have seen each other, I stared at the screen so long my phone dimmed and locked, and when I finally replied I said I needed space, said I was feeling off, said maybe we could talk later, because I still didn't know how to confront someone I had loved so deeply with a truth so ugly, and because part of me still hoped there was an explanation that didn't make me look like a fool who had fallen for someone who never actually existed. I spent the next 2 days in silence, replaying every moment we had shared and trying to fit this second life into the narrative she had woven so perfectly for me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make the pieces match, because they were never part of the same puzzle. They were fragments from two different worlds, and I was just the extra one, the secret, the one she tucked away when she didn't need him. When I finally asked her to come over, I told myself I wouldn't explode, that I would sit calmly across from her and speak with clarity and dignity and not let the hurt in my chest turn into rage, but the second she walked in smiling like nothing was wrong and leaned in to kiss me, I took a step back and something in my silence made her freeze, her smile flickering just long enough for me to see it slip into fear or maybe regret. And when I told her we needed to talk, she sat down without a word, as if she already knew what was coming and was just waiting for the shape of it to finally land. I didn't ask her if she had another life. I told her I knew, and her eyes didn't widen and her mouth didn't move, and for a second it felt like the air had been sucked from the room, because silence sometimes screams louder than words ever could. And when she finally spoke, she didn't lie, she didn't deflect, she simply said, "I didn't mean to hurt you," in a voice so low and so broken that for one terrible second I almost forgot what this moment was and only saw the woman I had once loved staring back at me. She told me she had been married for nearly a decade, that things had fallen apart years ago, and that she and her husband had been living more like roommates than partners, but she had stayed for their son, for stability, for the image of a life she was too afraid to admit had already died. And when she met me, she hadn't planned on falling in love, hadn't expected to feel anything again, let alone something that made her want to believe she still had a future beyond the pieces of her broken past. I listened to every word with my heart splitting open like wet wood under too much heat, because part of me wanted to understand, part of me wanted to believe that love can exist even inside a lie if the feelings were real. But the other part, the louder part, the part that had watched her kiss her son and laugh with her husband, knew that I had never been anything more than the part of her she hid, the piece of her story she kept in the shadows so she could feel alive without ever being fully honest. When she finished talking, she reached for my hand, and I pulled away, not because I hated her, not because I wanted to hurt her back, but because something inside me had finally broken in a way that couldn't be mended, not with words, not with apologies, not with love. And I told her I needed her to leave not just my apartment, but my life, because whatever we had shared, it had been real only for me and only halfway for her, and that kind of love doesn't survive once the truth has been dragged into the light. The first morning without her felt like standing in the wreckage of a house I hadn't realized was already on fire. The silence, so loud it pressed against my chest like grief given shape, and I wandered through the apartment like a ghost, touching things she had left behind, as if they could explain how something that felt so alive had collapsed into nothing without a sound. And it wasn't the betrayal itself that hurt the most, it was the hollow space where her presence used to be, the knowing that the woman who had once called me her person had been sharing her life with someone else in ways I never saw coming. For days I couldn't sleep, not because I was haunted by her, but because I was haunted by myself, by the version of me who had believed her, who had trusted her so completely that he missed every signal, every shift, every fracture. And I replayed our conversations like an investigator at a crime scene, trying to locate the moment the lie took root and bloomed into a reality so convincing even I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Friends called, and I ignored them, because how do you explain that your heart has been split open by someone who never truly belonged to you, that the future you thought you were building was just borrowed time from a life you were never meant to be part of, and that now even your memories feel foreign, like watching a movie of someone else's romance with your face poorly pasted in? I deleted her number, but couldn't bring myself to erase the photos, the way she laughed in mid-motion, the way she curled into me like we had always known each other. And I hated how even now, even with the truth shining through every lie like cracks in the wall, I still missed her. I still wanted to believe that somewhere deep down the love was real. But day by day the silence became less suffocating, and I started to breathe a little easier with each passing hour, and I forced myself outside, even when it felt pointless, walking streets that used to remind me of her and daring them to feel new again, because healing doesn't arrive with a trumpet blast. It creeps in quietly, asking only that you keep showing up even when it hurts. I stopped waiting for closure from her, because I realized closure isn't something someone gives you, it's something you find in the wreckage. When you finally understand that you didn't lose love, you lost the illusion of it, and that truth, even when it breaks you, is always better than a lie that keeps you warm. I didn't wake up one day magically healed or suddenly free of her name echoing in the back of my mind, but slowly over time the ache began to loosen its grip like a fist that finally tires of clenching, and I found myself breathing deeper than I had in weeks without realizing it, standing in line for coffee and realizing I hadn't thought about her that morning, or walking home through the park and noticing how the sunlight scattered across the grass in ways I hadn't seen since before everything burned. I started saying yes to things again, dinners with friends I had avoided, calls I kept silencing, conversations that didn't revolve around what I had lost but instead turned toward what I might still become. And somewhere between the shared laughter and the quiet late-night walks back to my apartment, I realized that I wasn't just moving on from her, I was moving back toward myself. I read books I had meant to read for years. I started running again, even though the first mile nearly broke me. I bought groceries without avoiding the aisle where she used to grab her favorite cereal, and all of it, these tiny victories, stacked together into a kind of freedom I hadn't expected to feel so soon. One Saturday afternoon, while flipping through records in a used vinyl shop downtown, I caught the eye of someone across the room. Not in a movie moment kind of way, not in some grand sweeping spark, spark, but in a small shared smile that felt honest and unforced. And for the first time since Rachel, I didn't feel the urge to compare, didn't feel guilt in the weightless curiosity of wondering what her name was, or what her laugh might sound like. I didn't rush into anything, didn't fall headfirst into a new chapter just to escape the silence of the last one. But I let myself wonder, and that wondering felt like healing in its own right, because when someone breaks you with a lie as big as another life, it takes time to believe you can trust anything again, especially yourself. But the more I chose my peace over her memory, the more I realized that healing isn't a finish line, it's a direction, and I was finally walking in it, one deliberate quiet step at a time, not chasing anyone this time, not even running from anything, just walking toward whatever came next, whole in the ways that mattered most. Months later, on a crisp fall evening with the city buzzing softly around me and the sky painted in deep bruised purples and golds, I sat alone on the rooftop of my building nursing a coffee gone cold and realized that for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't waiting for a call that wouldn't come or an apology that wouldn't arrive or a past that would never rewrite itself to fit the version I had once so desperately needed to believe in, because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken or lost or searching for the missing pieces she had taken with her. I was whole in a way that had nothing to do with her or anyone else, in a way that was stitched together by the quiet, steady work of facing myself even when it hurt more than I thought I could stand. I thought about Rachel sometimes not in bitterness, but in the same way you think about a town you once drove through and stayed too long in by accident. Interesting in its own way, but no longer a place you would ever call home. And I hoped wherever she was, she had found whatever peace she had been searching for when she tore through my life like a storm I wasn't ready for. And maybe that was the real gift she had given me: not love, not betrayal, not pain, but the undeniable proof that survival is not about staying untouched. It's about choosing to heal anyway and refusing to let the wrong people define what you deserve. Life didn't become a perfect movie after her absence. There were still bad days and long nights and small jagged memories that caught me off guard, but they didn't undo me anymore, because somewhere along the way I had stopped measuring my life by what I had lost and started valuing it by what I was still brave enough to build. And as the last sliver of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon and the world slipped quietly into night, I smiled to myself, not because everything had worked out exactly how I once dreamed, but because I had finally understood something I never could have learned without losing her first. That real love begins not with someone else's promises, but with the quiet, unbreakable choice to love yourself enough to never settle for less than the truth again.